So imagine you inherit a massive, complex business, one that's been run into the ground for decades. That's kind of the situation India's leaders were looking at in 1947. Today, we're going to dive into the epic 40-year economic experiment they launched to try and build a modern nation, basically from scratch. On August 15th, 1947, India wakes up to freedom. But that freedom came with this absolutely colossal question. This wasn't just about politics, it was about survival, about progress for 350 million people. To put that in perspective, that was about the size of the entire Western Hemisphere at the time. I mean, talk about a staggering task. Okay, so India's new leaders are at a crossroads, and they've basically got three main playbooks to choose from. On one side, you have pure capitalism, where the market and private companies call all the shots. On the complete other end of the spectrum, you've got pure socialism, where the government is in absolute control of everything. And then there was a third, kind of hybrid option, one that would end up defining India's path for the next 40 years. And that is exactly the path they took. India chose a mixed economy. Now, you have to remember, this was during the Cold War, a world split right down the middle. So this wasn't just an economic decision, it was a huge political statement. India was basically saying, we're not going to pick a side. Instead, they created this unique blend where the government would steer the ship, but still leave room for private businesses to do their thing. It was a massive balancing act right from the start. But how do you actually pull off a grand vision like that for hundreds of millions of people? You can't just wing it. You need a blueprint. And for India, that blueprint came in the form of the now famous 5-year plans. So what exactly was this economic planning? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a giant national to-do list, but a to-do list for everything, from building dams to setting up steel plants. This really powerful group called the Planning Commission was set up in 1950, and their job was to set these super ambitious targets for the whole country every 5 years. The very first plan kicked off in 1951. And these plans weren't just random. They were all anchored by 5 big, long-term goals. Think of them as the North Stars for India's whole economic journey. First, growth. Pretty simple, right? Just making the economic pie bigger for everyone. Second, modernization. Adopting new tech to catch up with the rest of the world. Third, self-reliance. Making what you need at home so you don't have to depend on other countries. Fourth, equity. Making sure the benefits of all this growth were shared fairly. And finally, number 5, full employment. Okay, so the plan is in place. First big hurdle? Food. For decades, Indian agriculture had been totally stagnant. It was time for a radical change, a huge gamble that would later become known as the Green Revolution. But look, before you can bring in all this new technology, you have to fix the old, broken system. And that meant some deep, serious land reforms. They got rid of the powerful zamindar system, this relic of the colonial era, which basically made the farmers who actually worked the land to the owners. They also regulated rent to stop exploitation and pushed to combine scattered little plots of land to make farming way more efficient. Now, let's talk about water for a second, because this is huge. In 1950, a tiny 15% of India's farmland had reliable irrigation. That's it. For the vast majority of farmers, your entire livelihood was at the mercy of the monsoons. But then, because of all this planning and investment in massive projects like dams and new wells, that number tripled to 45%. This was a real, tangible achievement. You could see it. It fundamentally changed the game for millions and millions of farmers. So all of this really set the stage for the main event, which kicked off around 1966. The Green Revolution was basically a technology-driven explosion in food production. And what were the magic ingredients? Well, these new high-yield variety seeds, or HYV seeds, plus a whole lot of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And the focus was laser-sharp on the big staples, like wheat and rice. But there was a catch. This new technology was really expensive. So to get farmers to actually adopt it, the government offered subsidies. And boy, did that spark a debate that is still raging today. On one hand, supporters said, look, these subsidies are crucial. They encourage new tech and help poor farmers. But critics on the other side argued they were a massive drain on the government's money and often ended up benefiting the wealthy farmers the most. It's a classic policy headache. All right, so agriculture is getting a massive overhaul. Now the national focus pivots to the next big pillar, industry. India basically had to build its industrial muscle from the ground up, and they had to do it fast.
So, you might be wondering, why did the government take the lead on this? Why not private companies? Well, there were a few key reasons. First, private industrialists back then just didn't have the kind of capital you need for gigantic projects like steel plants. Second, the Indian market was still pretty small, so it wasn't really profitable for them. And third, and this is a big one, the government's goal wasn't just to make a profit. It was this idea of growth with social justice, creating jobs and developing all parts of the country.
This whole plan was made official in the landmark 1956 industrial policy. It neatly carved up the entire economy into 3 categories. Category A was the big stuff, atomic energy, railways. That was only for the government. Category B was a sort of partnership zone, and Category C was left for the private sector. But, and this is a really big but, it was still kept under incredibly tight state control through a super complex system of licenses. Now, to give these new baby industries a fighting chance, India adopted what's called an inward-looking trade strategy. The whole goal was total self-reliance. And the method was import substitution, which is just a fancy way of saying, if we can make it here at home, we are not importing it. And to enforce this, they used massive taxes called tariffs and really strict limits called quotas to basically build a wall around the economy and shield domestic companies from any foreign competition. So, after 40 years of this grand experiment, what was the final verdict? Well, it's time to pull out the report card and look at the good, the bad, and the very complicated legacy this whole era left behind. Let's start with a major win. I mean, a huge one. During British rule, India's economy was basically stagnant, growing at a dismal 0.5% per year. But during the plan period, that rate shot up, hitting nearly 6% by 1990. The most crucial takeaway here is that the cycle of stagnation was finally and decisively broken. And the successes went way beyond just that growth number. Thanks to the Green Revolution, India achieved that critical goal of being able to feed itself. Its industrial sector, which was once pretty basic, was now making everything from steel to electronics, and a real foundation of modern infrastructure, we're talking roads, power, communications, was laid across the whole country. But this top-down control definitely had a dark side. The total lack of competition led to these huge, inefficient public monopolies. That system of licenses we mentioned, it just spiraled into a bureaucratic maze so complex and restrictive, it earned its own nickname, the Permit License Raj. And despite all those ambitious goals, inflation stayed stubbornly high and unemployment just kept on rising. This quote really hits the nail on the head when it comes to the core problem for the average person. See, when producers are totally protected from competition, they know you have to buy from them. There's nowhere else to go. So there's really no incentive to innovate or even just improve the quality of your stuff. A captive market almost always means the consumer gets a raw deal. Which leaves us with the big central question of this whole period. Was this 40-year experiment a necessary foundation that built the base for India's future growth? Or was it a costly detour that actually held the country back for decades? That is a debate that, believe me, continues to this day.